The Myers-Briggs Type Indicator Personality Assessment Test. 4 different dimensions of each individual's personality with 2 possible outcomes in each of those 4 areas, breaking down into 16 different personality types that encompass all of people everywhere. So today we're going to be looking at the INFJ. Going to spend a little time talking about what an INFJ is, and then talk about some fictional characters correspond with that type. So the INFJ stands for Introverted, Intuition, Feeling, and Judging. So on the introversion scale, a INFJ tends to be a person who takes in their energy by having more alone time, and they like their time to themselves or in small groups as opposed to large groups and large-scale events. The N stands for Intuition. This is how they take in their information. INFJs tend to be imaginative and abstract conceptualists. They can just conceptualize ideas on their own without having to have a concrete example to put those ideas into. The F stands for Feeling. This is how they make their decisions. So an INFJ tends to go more on their feelings than on rationalizing their way through a particular situation. So more emotion-driven. And then the J stands for Judging. This is how they choose to live their outer lives. A person who is a J tends to be rule-driven. They tend to be planners. They like to think ahead to figure out all the different possible outcomes and then make a plan to reach the best conclusion. So that's the quick and dirty version of what an INFJ is. They are commonly known as the counselor because of all of these 4 traits put together. They tend to be very introverted, sure, but do gravitate to deep and connected interpersonal relationships. Their affinity for rules and planning, coupled with their empathetic nature, tend to make them natural listeners and advice givers without being pushy or controlling at the same time. They tend to genuinely care about the well-being of their confidants and want to help them come up with the best way of achieving their goals possible. So this is why they're referred to as the counselor. These combination of traits tend to make them good therapists, good teachers, pastors, or social workers, just anything that requires a one-on-one interaction with people and a empathetic nature, being able to feel the feelings of those they're trying to help out. Now, the INFJ is actually the rarest of the 16 personality types, only accounting for about 1 to 2% of the population. But despite them being so rare in the general population, they actually tend to be overrepresented in fiction as secondary characters who act as counselors or wise advisors to the more extroverted, adventurous main characters. So you see them popping up in fiction quite a bit, especially action-adventure or sci-fi, fantasy kind of things. There's a lot of INFJ characters advising the main characters. So one thing to keep in mind, though, is that when it comes to any of the Myers-Briggs types, there's always some wiggle room. Very few people or characters are concretely one type. And that's true in real life. It's especially true when it comes to fiction, because authors and writers of shows, movies, fiction, they're not commonly thinking about the personality type of their characters and making sure that everything these characters do stays true to their type. They're writing more for the plot and the story. So various fictional characters can waffle between traits common to different personality types. But we're going to go over some of the most commonly thought INFJ characters in prominent fiction. And we're going to start with one that's not actually fitting into the idea of a counselor. And that would be Elsa from Frozen. Now, she's never been a particularly much of a advice giver in any of the movies that she's been in or times she's appeared, but she is still an INFJ. She's certainly introverted. That can easily be seen. She tends to keep to herself as much as possible while still fostering some deeply close personal relationships, such as with her sister. And she is also very rule-driven, so that would be the judging, the J coming into effect, because she's very fastidious in maintaining her rules of how she has to govern her country, as well as rules for how to make sure, at least in the first film, how to make sure nobody ever caught on to her powers and her abilities. So she kept to strict rules and plans as well. And she also is very much in the F sense, the feeling type, as when she couldn't contain her emotions anymore, they bubbled over and she did the whole thing, you know, the let it go. So, even though not much of a counselor per se, does still fit into the INFJ category. Going over to DC Comics, one of the most prominent INFJ characters is the Batman villain Poison Ivy. Much like Elsa, a lot of the same traits, very introverted, keeping to herself except for a few close personal relationships, such as with Harley Quinn. Also very feeling as well. She tends to be highly emotion-driven in how she makes her decisions, what kind of things she's going to do. It's usually because she feels bad about the environmental impact humans are having on the planet. So she's very emotion-driven. Now, a lot of people tend to think that Harley Quinn herself is an INFJ because she would fit into the role of a counselor because of the fact that she, at one time, was a psychiatrist. However, at that point, Harley Quinn went through a big personality shift from who she used to be to who she is now, and she really wouldn't fall into the INFJ category, if nothing else, because Harley Quinn is very much an extrovert, not an introvert. So Poison Ivy would be more the counselor type. And you can even see that in the Harley Quinn animated series that is currently ongoing, where Poison Ivy often acts as the sounding board and advice giver to Harley Quinn. Moving to another particular fandom, if anybody watches the show Supernatural, very prominent INFJ in Supernatural in the lead character of Sam Winchester. Sam Winchester, despite being one of the Winchester brothers and very violent certainly, is certainly the heart of the duo, the heart of the group. He's always the one who is standing up for anybody who might be getting put down or treated unfairly by his older brother, Dean, and it very much has more emotion in his thought processes and decision-making than you'd see in the other characters of that show. A very, very famous INFJ character from a very famous fandom would be that of Dumbledore from the Harry Potter series. As said earlier, you get a lot of INFJ characters in fiction who are advice givers and wise advisors to the main characters. That's certainly true in Harry Potter and in Dumbledore. Dumbledore being the wise, intelligent counselor to Harry Potter, constantly giving him help and advice on what to do. Now, a lot of people have theorized that Voldemort himself is also an INFJ, certainly introverted, certainly very emotion-driven in his negative emotions, his rage and his anger. Intuition can be argued as well, but there's also some idea that he might be more of an INTJ, some other personality traits blending in as well. So Voldemort is kind of nebulous, hard to pin down an exact type for him, but Dumbledore, certainly an INFJ. Going to another fandom concerning magic and fantasy, and going over to Lord of the Rings, there's a number of INFJ characters in Lord of the Rings. Galadriel, the elf who is one of the ring bearers from the elf people, is an INFJ. Throughout the Lord of the Rings series, the only role she ever played was in giving advice and counseling the Fellowship of the Ring. Additionally, Gandalf, one of the most prominent characters, also considered to be an INFJ. So very much a feeling character, always goes off of his emotions, and that probably more than anything else is what kept him from sliding down the road to evil that Saruman did. Saruman more of an INTJ. Also, other INFJ characters in Lord of the Rings, Frodo Baggins can be seen as an INFJ as well. Very intuitive, relatively introverted, especially for a hobbit that tend to be about big gatherings and boisterous and having a good time. He's more like his Uncle Bilbo preferring close company and not having a lot of big get-togethers. Also a very feeling, emotion-driven character as well in Frodo, so several INFJs in The Lord of the Rings. One more fantasy series we could look at with a prominent INFJ is that of Game of Thrones. And the character of Jon Snow can be seen as an INFJ there as well. Certainly introverted, he never cared for large-scale groups, and he chose to join the Night Watch and go live on the wall apart from the rest of society, so fairly introverted there. An emotion-driven character, he almost always went with his gut and what felt right. This is what led him to constantly be advocating for mercy for those who had committed crimes. This is why he was constantly looking after Sam, even though all the rest of the Night Watch felt that Sam was a bit of a loser, so he was always looking out for him because he's a very empathetic character. Also, he could be seen as a bit of a counselor because he would always be trying to give his advice to his superiors, whether in the Night Watch, whether he was talking to Daenerys, he was always trying to give advice to those on how to best do things and to get the best outcomes. So a very INFJ character in that of Jon Snow. Another fandom that has a variety of INFJ characters is if we go over to Star Wars. Practically all of the Master Jedi fall into the INFJ category. This is Obi-Wan Kenobi, Qui-Gon Jinn, Yoda, lots of INFJs tossed around there. It's very important to the Jedi to be Fs, to be feeling. They keep their emotions in check, sure, but they utilize the Force by way of controlling their emotions and using their feelings. So, trust your feelings, Luke, is what they would always say to Luke Skywalker. So the Jedi tend to be very big on the feeling. Introverted as well, they usually tend to keep to themselves rather than engage in large-scale gatherings. Intuitive, certainly, this is how they take in their information. With the power of the Force, it almost could be said to work through intuition. And they are very rule-driven planners, so that's the judging coming in as well. So INFJs all around in the Star Wars universe where the Master Jedi are concerned. And if we want to take a look at the Marvel universe, there's quite a few prominent INFJs as well. Probably none more so prominent than that of Captain America. Captain America is certainly an empathetic character, an emotional character. He is often juxtaposed with Iron Man, Tony Stark, in that Tony Stark is more of the thinker, and Captain America, Steve Rogers, more of the feeler, more of the emotion. But he is also very big on the J, the judging. He's rule-driven. He's certainly a planner. He's a master strategist, so he's definitely got the J going on. And one could maybe argue that he's not the I, not so much the introversion part of it, because Captain America is very outgoing. He's a leader, sure. But just because one can be a leader and one can foster good relationships with large groups of people doesn't necessarily mean they're extroverted. So INFJs, as previously said, make good teachers as well. That's a leader of a classroom situation, leader of teams. So just because you can take on a role of a leader doesn't necessarily mean you're extroverted. It just means that you are good at strategizing and coming up with direct ways of achieving a team goal. So could still be seen as introverted because even though he does lead teams, you never really see Captain America going out to parties, socializing, getting involved in large-scale gatherings. A couple other INFJs in Marvel. You have Jean Grey from the X-Men, Groot from Guardians of the Galaxy, and Doctor Strange are some of the most prominent INFJs. And even though all four of those are very different characters, obviously, they all share common INFJ qualities, specifically the feelings, the intuition, and the rule-driven planning that goes along with the J in judging. So these are some of the most common and prominent INFJs in fiction. A lot of overrepresentation in fiction, despite, again, being only 1% to 2% of the general population. So a lot of INFJs out there in the media. Well, that'll about do it for this look at the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. I'll link in the description down below the website that you can go to find out your own Myers-Briggs type if you are unaware of it currently. It's a fun little thing to do and see if it allies with what you think of yourself. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to this video. Ding the bell to get notifications when I upload a new video. Feel free to share this video wherever you like, as it can help grow the channel. Toss me any suggestions on new videos you'd like to see or future MBTI personality types you'd like to see explored. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.